Recording in progress.
Good evening. I'll call to order the Louisville Planning Commission of February 9th, 2023, with a roll call, please.
Commissioner Krantz. Here. Commissioner Osterman.
Here.
Commissioner Choi.
Here.
Chair Brown Eyes.
Here.
Commissioner Moline.
Here.
Commissioner Howe.
Here.
With that, then I would move or ask for a motion to approve this evening's agenda.
So moved?
In a second.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Then we're going to look at minutes. We have to do each of them individually. Looking at the November 10th, 2022 minutes, does anybody have any corrections they would like to offer? Seeing none, then a motion to approve those, please.
Second motion.
Okay. Do you have a motion?
Sure.
Yes. Commissioner Moline with the
Yep.
motion.
Yep, that's
Commissioner
fine.
Howe with
Yep.
second. Thank you. And we're still doing roll call on these. I wonder if we can go ahead and put the roll
Okay.
call.
Commissioner Krantz.
Yes.
Commissioner Osterman.
I was not here at the last meeting, so.
Oh, this is
Do
the
I-
November 2022
sorry.
minutes.
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry, I was not here for that meeting. Can I abstain, please?
Yes, please. Thank you. I will vote yes.
Commissioner Choi.
He was
Not
not here
present.
for
I
these meetings. yes.
Exactly. So you just said yes,
He'll abstain.
Chair.
I'm yes.
Commissioner Moline.
Yes.
Commissioner Howe.
Yes.
All right, the motion carries. Looking at the December 8th, 2022 minutes, do we have any corrections that anybody wanted to offer for that?
Motion to approve minutes for December 8th, 2022.
Thank you.
So moved? Or what do I say? No, I say second.
Yeah, thank you. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Krantz.
Yes.
Commissioner Osterman.
Yes.
Commissioner Choi.
I will abstain from the December.
Chair Brown Eyes.
Yes.
Commissioner Moline.
Yes.
Commissioner Howe.
Yes.
All, and then the January 12th, 2023 minutes. Do we have any corrections to make for those?
I have one small correction. Says that Krantz says she does not require a drive aisle to be a buffer, but that was supposed to say that Krantz says that she does not consider a drive aisle to be a buffer. And I emailed that too.
Thank you for the correction.
And if I may add one, Chair, on the January 12th minutes, page 10 out of 13 to help whoever's editing, it should read non-combustible, 6-foot non-combustible fence rather than 6-foot combustible fence. So that changes the meaning a
There was
little
also
bit.
somewhere in there was a 6-inch instead of 6 foot. Somewhere buried in those
Okay.
minutes. I would offer that up as a change. We'll find that. It just had the numeral 6IN next to it. We'll get that straightened out too. All right. With that, motion to approve.
So moved?
And second?
Roll call, please.
Commissioner Krantz.
Yes.
Commissioner Osterman.
Yes.
Commissioner Choi.
Yes.
Chair Brown Eyes.
Yes.
Commissioner Moline.
Yes.
Commissioner Howe.
Yes.
Moving along. Nicely done. All right. We'll open it up now for public items, for public comment for items that are not on the agenda. And in this case, we'd like to invite you up for ones that is on the agenda, even though because we appreciate that you need to leave. So, and then please start with your name, address, and limit your comments to 3 minutes, please.
My name is Carrie Cornejo, 941 El Dorado Lane in the Cornerstone neighborhood. So thanks for taking this early. I have to pick my mom at the airport, and she's early. So I just wanted to say that I am in support of the PUD for the Cornerstone neighborhood, and we're just asking if it can be pushed forward quickly, as many people are rebuilding, and with those busy streets, fences are super important for our kids and families. So just in support of the PUD.
Thank you very much. Appreciate you coming out. Have a safe drive. Do we have anybody else who'd like to make public comment for items that are not on the agenda this evening? I don't see any raised hands. You can use the raise hand if you're joining by, I don't have that view. Yeah, if you're joining by Zoom, or *9 if you are by telephone. Seeing none then, we'll move into our first item of continued business. I will now reopen the public hearing on a request for a Plan Unit Development Amendment, Coal Creek Ranch Filing 3 and Coal Creek Ranch Filing 3 Replat A. The purpose of the hearing is to receive evidence regarding the application materials and provide a public forum for all interested parties who wish to comment on this request before the Planning Commission. The procedure for the public hearing will be as follows. Are we reopening up with full presentation, actually? Let's check in on procedure for this one. Yes, yeah, okay, yep.
Yes.
Yep.
So last week, we just continued this item without any discussion, so we're starting at the
Okay.
beginning.
First, there will be a presentation and testimony by city staff, followed by questions from the Planning Commission to staff. Next, we'll have a presentation and testimony by the applicant, followed by questions from the Planning Commission to the applicant. In this case, those two parties are the same. After these presentation, members of the public who have joined this meeting in person, by computer, or telephone may speak regarding the application. Anyone who would like to speak is asked to complete a speaker card. Use the if you're in person, use the raise hand function if you're participating by computer, or *9 if calling in by telephone. Please limit your comments to 3 minutes per person. Pooling of comments is not permitted. The purpose of public comment is to receive public testimony, not a forum for debate or dialogue. Commenters are encouraged to raise pertinent issues and may ask questions for clarity. However, these questions will not be directly answered during the public comment period. The applicant and staff, in this case, the staff will make a closing statement. I'll then close public hearing, and no further testimony or other evidence will be received unless the commission decides to reopen the hearing. The Planning Commission will discuss the matter and may approve with conditions, deny, or continue to a future meeting. Public hearings are recorded for the public record. All testimony must be presented after stating your full name and address. Does anyone participating in this hearing object to the procedure I've described? Seeing none, do we have notification?
Yes, this application was properly noticed and continued per municipal code.
And do we have any disclosures? Seeing none, we will let you take it away with the presentation, please.
Lisa, you're free to proceed.
Sorry, thank you. My internet apparently is being spotty, so I will do my best. Elizabeth, I emailed you my presentations. If it doesn't work well, then I can maybe have one of you share for me.
Sure thing.
And so anyway, let's give this a go. Let me share my screen. Internet was fine all day, and then people come home from work. So I want to say hello to all of those of you that I've been working with, both online and they're in the room in person. I'm sorry I couldn't be there tonight, but we are here tonight to talk about Coal Creek Ranch Filing 3, the PUD amendment related to fences. As suggested or said earlier, this was continued from January 12th and met all public notice requirements.
Thank you.
Yes, Coal Creek Ranch Filing 3 PUD was originally approved in February of 1990. It included 140 single-family properties, 139 of which were destroyed during Marshall Fire. The current PUD regulates all fences within the neighborhood to some degree. And as you all know, Ordinance 1838, Series 2022, was a citywide exemption for wood fences that adjoin homes to exempt out the requirement for wood. This neighborhood does have a very active HOA, and the HOA primarily led all of the outreach and decision-making around the fence changes that we are talking about tonight. We have the representative from Vista Management, Cindy Combs. She provided a letter to you in your packet, but we do have a number of other neighbors as well. And so I just want to note that this was kind of a combined effort. And so tonight, what we are talking about, again, Coal Creek Ranch Filing 3. It's only the one filing within Coal Creek Ranch that this applies to. The remainder of the filings will remain unchanged at this time. first all, which isn't shown on this slide, but we just want to make sure it's really clear with everyone. We've talked about this a lot at the neighborhood level, that all fence standards for interior fences will be removed as part of this PUD amendment. So all fences on the interior of the neighborhood will be regulated via the municipal code. Now, the HOA still intends to maintain some design regulations for these interior fences, but they are continuing to work through that process on their own and making those final decisions. But for the purposes of the PUD, there will not be design regulations. So the area with the black dots, that is property that abuts the city golf course. And so that property, that fence used to be a 3-rail wood fence. And those homeowners through the HOA survey have elected to install a 4-foot-high black metal fence. I have a detail on the next slide. And so you can see that wraps around from Dillon Road, kind of around to the south where the golf course property ends and joins city open space. The next segment is the southern segment of the neighborhood. You can see where it says revised from 6-foot-high cedar to no standard. That property abuts about 150-foot wide section of city-owned property zoned open space. The PUD previously required that to be a 6-foot-high fence. However, we understand that fences along that segment varied from some having 6-foot-high cedar to some having open. And it's also really not that visible from any public spaces. At this time, there's no trail back there. There may be in the future, but right now there's no trail, and it's not really visible from any roadway. And so from the city's perspective, having continuity, staff finds that that's not an important consideration here. And so we've heard mixed desires from those homeowners to be able to install non-combustible fences, open fences, privacy fences. And so from our perspective, we would just be removing that, which means they could install any fence up to 6 feet high. And then finally, we're talking about the fence along Dillon and 88th, and that's the hatch area that runs kind of diagonally there. Currently, the PUD requires 6-foot-high wood cedar with an ornamental cap, and the color that is spec'd is called bramble tan. I have the Sherwin-Williams equivalent. That's the current standard. That's the fence that you saw there previously. Now, I want to be clear, though, that the neighbors along this section are still hoping to collaborate with the HOA on potential changes. I think their early survey work was shortly after the fire. And so I think opinions have changed within the neighborhood regarding the importance of non-combustible fences. However, they're still working through that process. So for now, for the sake of the rest of the neighbors, we're going to bring this PUD amendment forward. But I just want to caveat that, that these neighbors are still kind of working through this segment. But for now, we're going to leave it as is. And so you can see the next slide here. This shows the details for the 2 fence designs that will be captured within this PUD. The first is the 4-foot-high black metal fence that will abut the city golf course. And then the next is just a carryover of the previous PUD, the 6-high cedar fence with the cap, Brambleton. And so with that, we're recommending approval of Resolution 3, recommending approval of a draft resolution going to City Council to amend Coal Creek Ranch Filing 3 PUD regulations. And I'm happy to take any questions that you might have on this one.
If we have commissioner questions of staff at this time? Seeing none, I'll open it up to public comment. If you're online, please use *9 if you're on phone, *9 if you're on Zoom, please the raise hand function. I don't have that screen. No. Oh, there we go. Yeah. All right. All right. Appears we have no public comment then. I'm guessing you don't have much in the way of a closing statement, Lisa?
No, I would just, if any of the residents want to quickly chime in with support, I guess I would say, no comments at this time probably indicate everyone's all on the same page, but just want to let folks know now's your time to chime in if you have a concern with the proposal that I'm not aware of. And if not, I have nothing else to add.
Great. Thank you very much. I will now close a public hearing, and planning commissioners will deliberate on the evidence presented. During deliberations, no further comment, public comment, or other testimony or evidence will be received. Who would like to begin? Why don't we start on the far right? Commissioner Howe? We'll just work our way across the table.
Skier's right, I suppose. Yeah, I think that these proposals are valid, and I think we should pass them quickly. I think residents are eager to build and get back in their houses, and these fences are sometimes the first step in doing that. So I would support this resolution.
I will also support it. It sounds like we maybe don't have any of the residents from this particular subdivision here, but I think everybody on our commission is, I'll just say, deeply saddened by what's happened and the process that people have had to go through. And so we're excited to look for ways to expedite building and keeping you all moving on getting back to homes. And I just also want to say I appreciate staff working with the neighborhood on these things too. So I will be supporting this.
Commissioner Choi?
I appreciate the effort put forth by staff to work through these. I know the different neighborhoods and the different HOAs have different communication styles and engagement. I think the package put together was comprehensive, and I'm, again, in support of moving this all forward expeditiously.
Thank you. Commissioner Osterman?
Thank you. I'm also in support of the resolution, and I'm excited to do whatever it takes to expedite the rebuilding process for our neighbors.
And I'm also in support of this and really appreciate all the effort that we saw in the packet to coordinate with the neighbors and the HOA. It's great to see everybody on the same page.
Great. I also find myself in support of it. Echoing the, yes.
Sorry to interrupt. There was a hand up in the
Yeah.
audience, and
Well,
just
so
went down.
unfortunately, public comment has been closed.
Sure, I just wanted to,
So,
in
thank
case you wanted to reopen it, just wanted to offer that.
Thank you. With that, then, I would ask for a motion. Commissioner Choi, go for it.
So motioned.
Thank you. How about a second?
Second.
And this is for the Cold Creek Ranch Filing 3 and Cold Creek Ranch Filing 3A replat, Resolution 3, Series 2023. Roll call vote, please.
Commissioner Krantz,
Yes.
Commissioner Osterman,
Yes.
Commissioner Choi,
Yes.
Chair Brown Eyes,
Yes.
Commissioner Moline,
Yes.
Commissioner Howe.
Yes.
Motion carries. Thank you all for your work. And Lisa, thanks for chiming in from afar. Really appreciate your commitment to it all as well. All right, with that then, we will open up for the first item of new business. I will now open the public hearing on a request for a plan unit development amendment cornerstone, Resolution 5, Series 2023. The purpose of the hearing is to receive evidence regarding the application materials and provide a public forum for all interested parties who wish to comment on this request before the Planning Commission. The procedure for the public hearing will be as follows. First, there'll be a presentation and testimony by city staff, followed by questions from the Planning Commission to staff. After this presentation, members of the public who have joined this meeting in person, by computer, or telephone may speak regarding the application. Anyone who would like to speak is asked to complete a speaker card. Use the raise hand function if participating by computer, or *9 if calling in by telephone. Please limit your comments to 3 minutes per person. Pooling of comments is not permitted. The purpose of public comment is to receive public testimony, not a forum for debate or dialogue. Commenters are encouraged to raise pertinent issues and may ask questions for clarity. However, these questions will not be directly answered during the public comment period. The applicant and staff will then be allowed to make a closing statement. I will then close the public hearing, and no further testimony or other evidence will be received unless the commission decides to reopen the hearing. The Planning Commission will discuss the matter and may approve with conditions, deny, or continue to a future meeting. Public hearings are recorded for the public record. All testimony must be presented after stating your full name and address. Does anyone participating in this hearing object to the procedure I've described? Seeing none, do we have notification?
Good evening. Yes, publication and notice requirements have been met per municipal code.
Do we have any disclosures? Seeing none, All right. If you can begin with the presentation.
You bet. Let me share screen here. So for some reason, when I go to slideshow, Zoom doesn't like to cooperate with my computer. So sorry, you get to see the whole thing. So again, second up for you tonight is a Cornerstone PUD amendment related to fence regulations. And again, Cornerstone is a neighborhood that was entirely affected by Marshall Fire. It has a PUD that was originally approved in August of 1990 for 71 single-family properties, all of which were destroyed during the fire. The current PUD regulates fences, all fences within the neighborhood to some degree. And as we keep mentioning, this ordinance that we approved last year exempts wood fences that face the street abutting properties to exempts them from installing wood. This neighborhood, while it has covenants, does not have an HOA. And so this is entirely a neighborhood-driven proposal. And we've been really working hard on this neighborhood. I just want to say that this one, I think, has been the most comprehensive and has taken the most time. And it's maybe not an approach that we would have expected for an outcome at the beginning, but I think this is probably the best that we could do. And so you all probably are familiar with this neighborhood. It's really on that prominent corner on the north side of McCaslin Boulevard and Via Appia. And it previously had along the Via Appia and McCaslin side, it varied from 5 foot to 6 foot high cedar fence with a cap that was stained dune gray. And so that was regulated through the PUD, that requirement for stain. It was 6 feet tall when you get north of this little walkway, and then 5 feet tall for the remainder, as well as this little segment along here on El Dorado Lane as you come into the neighborhood. And then previously it required 42-inch, or it actually didn't specify the height, California chain link fence along this property that abuts the fire station and city open space. And then we're going to be, again, removing interior fence standards. And so the proposal here, again, to remove all interior fence standards to allow entirely flexible fence design, provided it meets municipal code requirements. Along these properties here, I saw some of them both online and in the room in the audience, some of these property owners, but they collectively prefer to install up to 48-inch high black material open style fence. So either a California chain link with black chain link or other black open style fence. So I think they're consistent on the black and the height and the open style, but they want a little bit of flexibility, related to what goes in there. And then for the remainder of the fence, there was a really strong desire within this neighborhood to allow non-combustible fence design. And there was kind of what I would say an equally strong desire to be able to do a more cost-sensitive wood fence. And so really, we worked pretty hard and quite some time to try and see if there was a way to reconcile those two competing interests. And ultimately, where we landed was to require a 6 foot high solid fence with vertical slats with a Sherwin-Williams color that was spec'd. And so there's a group in the neighborhood that worked hard to find a specific fence that is a steel fence. It's actually being installed in a few places in Superior. So it's entirely, really non-combustible. It's a high quality fence. It looks really nice. And the neighborhood coalesced around a color that they liked, and then we spec'd the Sherwin-Williams to match. And so any wood fence or any other material would have to all be kind of stained or painted the same color. So it's not a consistent fence, but it does have consistency in some of the design elements. Again, the overall height, vertical slats, and the color. But is it the same fence all around the perimeter? No. And this would be the first time that we're bringing forth a design request to you that doesn't actually install the same fence. And so we've, really worked hard. I think this is probably the best compromise we could come up with, again, with a lot of competing interests in the neighborhood. And I'm going to let the folks in the room and the folks online from the neighborhood, I think maybe share a little bit of their perspective, again, as this is really a neighborhood-driven decision. And with that, I'm recommending approval of this resolution 5. Happy to take any questions. Happy to turn it over to public comment.
Do we have any questions for Lisa? Seeing none, thank
One-
you.
sorry,
Oh, we do,
Chairman.
yes.
Just one question, Lisa. What is the condition on the north side of the development that abuts the houses on Arapahoe Circle?
That would be just subject to the municipal code. So that area of the PUD did not have a specific perimeter fence design, being that it abutted Centennial Lake. So it had just kind of a 6-foot solid cedar fence. So it's being treated in this case as an interior fence with no design parameters.
Okay, and just a question on that, kind of that northwest lot where it looks like the condition could change mid-lot. Is that a true representation of where where the two options would meet essentially?
Yes, that is true, because that little jog there, it happens a couple different places. You can see it happens on that northwest corner. It also happens down on a lot on the southeast side. I know the southeast side, I've asked them specifically if they're okay kind of jogging at that point. That property owner would have to install on the northwest side. It could basically kind of where that is open, facing McCaslin there, they would have to meet the requirement. But beyond there, there's nothing that says they couldn't do the same fence, but they really have flexibility at that point when it turns. So you're correct.
Any additional questions?
Thank you, Chair.
Seeing none, I will now open it for public comment. Please limit yourself to 3 minutes and begin with stating your name and address.
So we have two folks from the in-person audience.
Okay, great.
The first is Christian Dino. I hope I didn't mangle your last name. And on deck is Judy Kern.
I also see Lisa Hughes has raised her hand online there. Great.
Hi, my name's Christian Dino. I live at 967 Eldorado Lane. That's right at the corner of McCaslin and Via Appia, just up on the hill there. We've worked together as a neighborhood to try and really come together and take into consideration everyone's viewpoints on this. There were some of us, myself included, that were interested in having a non-combustible fence option. And there's others that really didn't feel that that was important. I think that what we've come up with that has the vertical striation pattern, has the consistent height, the consistent color, from a distance will look very similar from the street. You have to consider that throughout this neighborhood, most of these fences abut an open space with landscaping and other things that break up that fence pattern as well. I'm probably about 2 months away from completing my home, and I've got 2 big black labs that I would really love to have a fence around that yard before I move in. So if you could really expedite this and push for approval, I would greatly appreciate it. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you for your comments.
Good evening. Judy Kern, 955 Eldorado. I'm one of the people that backs to McCaslin. Thank you, Lisa, for all of the many hours of work on us. It really has been, we're all in Cornerstone, a tremendous neighborhood effort. In fact, I think I've spent more time with my neighbors on this fence issue than I did in the 24 years I've lived in that neighborhood. So this was nice, actually. But the reason I stood up is I just want you guys to know that we really did work hard on this to try to come up with something that met a lot of our needs. My husband and I fully support Christian in being able to fence in his labs. We're going to be lagging behind in our build process and want to save as much money as possible. So we're kind of on that, we can't afford a metal fence, but don't want to prevent him from having something so like solid and great for his family and their needs. So we're kind of hoping that even though this is a unique request, that you guys can see the uniqueness of our neighborhood as well. We've put a lot of time. We will be landscaping on the roadside of the fences. Most of us, I think, did that before too. So it won't look bad when you guys are going up and down McCaslin or along Via Appia. Thanks.
Thank you for coming in. Thank you for your comments. I believe we have Lisa Hughes on the Zoom.
We do. Lisa, I've
Hi.
unmuted you. Great, okay.
Okay, hi, sorry. My name is Lisa Hughes. I lived at 887 Larkspur Court, which backs to the city open space. And I am just supporting this proposal. I am one of the people in the neighborhood who has worked hard on this fence thing for the last about 3 or 4 months. So I would really encourage you to support it. The homeowners that back the open space have talked amongst ourselves. We used to have California chain link. We purposely want open fences so that we can enjoy the open space behind our house. But we also fully support the rest of the neighborhood needing privacy fences and taller fences as they back up to major streets. And we worked hard on, our wanting to have open style, but still giving people the flexibility if they needed to do California chain link, since it could be a little bit cheaper. And actually, the chain link part of our fences all did survive the fire, just not the wood. So anyway, we would just encourage you to support this. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Appreciate your comments. Seeing no additional public comments? Can we ask you, if?
I just gave my card.
Oh, great.
Sorry.
No,
Please.
come on up, Ann
You're
Brennan.
welcome.
I'm Ann Brennan. I lived at 888 Larkspur Court, which is also on the, I'm that southeast corner lot that Lisa was talking about. We back up to both the fire station open space in our case, and then at a bend, at a kink in our back line, we're part of the perimeter fence on Via Appia. We were the first occupants of Cornerstone neighborhood. We moved in May of 1991. And I am thrilled to say that most of our street is rebuilding. Some of us are still there that have been there for 30 years. I am strongly in favor of this resolution. I would love for all of us to build back with just as much hardening as we can. I know it's debatable whether anything would have stopped that fire, but I'm moving back in that neighborhood and I want everything working to my benefit. We're downwind of everything that burned. The enclave, hillside, the open space, the west side of Cornerstone, it all blew into our front yard. The garbage used to blow into our front yard. Everything came right to my house. And so anything I can do to harden, we're gonna do. We've gotten quotes for both metal and wood, and it's only a 10% difference. And that's a small price in the overall rebuilding, and we're gonna do it. But I also want everyone to come home. This is so traumatic. We don't have an HOA. Our designs are all gonna look different. We're not gonna look homogeneous anymore, but it doesn't matter. We wanna come home. And we need this decided quickly for all the people who are out in front. So I also appreciate the incredible work that has been done here, the shared decision with my neighbors, and would appreciate your support for the resolution. Thank you.
Thank you for coming out. We appreciate your comments. With that, seeing no additional hands raised, invite a staff response and closing statement.
Nothing further, just really want to just share with the neighbors in both neighborhoods tonight that it's been my pleasure to work with you all and try and come up with solutions that meet your needs. And I have nothing further to add other than we support the resolution as drafted.
Great, thank you. I will now close the public hearing, and then planning commissioners will deliberate on the evidence presented. During deliberations, no further public comment or other testimony or evidence will be received. Why don't I start on the far left this time? Commissioner Krantz.
Sure, thank you. I'm in support of this proposal, but I think for this particular one, it's really wonderful to have real people in here and people who wrote in and people who called in online to support it so that we really know that this has the community support. So thanks for showing up.
Commissioner Osterman.
I support the resolution as well, and agree with Commissioner Krantz. It's really great to hear from the community, and I applaud you for all the work that you've done to get to this point. So, yep, thanks.
Thank you. Commissioner Choi.
Thank you, Chair. I am overall in support and appreciate the homeowners coming together without the HOA directing this, and applaud the efforts to try to rebuild and harden as much as possible.
Commissioner Moline?
Yep, I'm in support of this as well, and again, appreciate, like my fellow commissioners, the work that you've all done, and excited to be able to at least move you on through this portion of the process tonight, I hope.
Yeah, thank you, Lisa, for your presentation and helping the citizens to advocate for their needs. I think you've been a special part of the city outreach for all the fire victims. Understanding that not everyone affected by the fire can move back into their houses. However, for those who are willing and able to climb the rebuild hill, I think a thank you to the citizens of this area for collaborating with the city to update these PUDs. It's uplifting to see such a large neighborhood agree with such an important issue. I hope we can reduce the challenge slightly in passing this resolution expeditiously, allowing you to return to your homes as soon as possible. Good luck.
Thank you. I'm also in favor of it at this time. I was recently driving through a historic neighborhood in Denver, where, of course, all of the fences are all completely different. So I'm actually excited by this proposal that you were able to come together and find a way to allow for some variance within, while still aiming for a certain look and feel. So I think this even is really strong. So great work on that. With that, then, I would entertain a motion.
I'll move approval of resolution number 5, series 2023, a resolution recommending approval of an amendment to the Cornerstone Planned Unit Development regarding fence regulations.
A
Second?
Thank you. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Krantz,
Yes.
Commissioner Osterman,
Yes.
Commissioner Choi,
Yes.
Commissioner Chair Brown Eyes, pardon me. Commissioner Moline,
Yes.
Commissioner Howe.
Yes.
Motion carries. Thank you all. Good luck moving forward. Side question, comment, maybe?
If I could for just a moment, break protocol, I just would like to thank all of you for your consideration in passing this quickly, and I really want to thank Lisa for all of her efforts and time in helping us get here.
Sure. Thank you. Appreciate it. Motion carries. Now we'll move into our next item. I will now open the public hearing on a request for a municipal code amendment, gasoline and automobile service station cap, which is Resolution 6, Series 2023. Purpose of the hearing is to receive evidence regarding the application materials and provide a public forum for all interested parties who wish to comment on this request before the Planning Commission. The procedure for the public hearing will be as follows. First, there will be a presentation and testimony by city staff, followed by questions from the Planning Commission to staff. After this presentation, members of the public who have joined the meeting in person by computer or telephone may speak regarding the application. Anyone who would like to speak is asked to complete a speaker card, use the raise hand function if participating by computer, or *9 if calling in by telephone. Please limit your comments to 3 minutes per person. Pooling of comments is not permitted. The purpose of public comment is to receive public testimony, not a forum for debate or dialogue. Commenters are encouraged to raise pertinent issues and may ask questions for clarity. However, these questions will not be directly answered during the public comment period. The applicant and staff will then be allowed to make a closing statement. I will then close the public hearing, and no further testimony or other evidence will be received unless the commission decides to reopen the hearing. The Planning Commission will discuss the matter and may approve with conditions, deny, or continue to a future meeting. Public hearings are recorded for the public record. All testimony must be presented after stating your full name and address. Does anyone participating in the hearing object to the procedure I've described? Seeing none. Yeah, I see, we have behind you, Rob, we have a hand raised. So you are welcome at this time to state your objections. So you have 3 minutes on this one also. Stay with name and address, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I would.
Sorry, name and address, please.
Oh,
Right.
certainly. Catherine Smith. I prefer not to give my address. That's actually my public comment because I have been stalked in the past. And I feel that there's nothing that I'm aware of in law that requires us to actually give our address. I'm happy to
Fine with
state
that.
that I'm a resident
Okay.
of Louisville. And I think that that should be the general rule for the Planning Commission.
Okay,
And I'm also willing to specify my ward.
okay, great. Thank you. Um, do we have proper notification?
Yes, we do. This was published in the Boulder Daily Camera, January 22nd, posted in all required locations by January 25th. So all notice requirements have been met.
Do we have any planning commission disclosures? Seeing none. All right, if you begin with your presentation, please.
Okay, well, good evening, everyone. I'm Rob Zuccaro, Community Development Director for the city. I'll be making the staff presentation on this item. So this is a resolution before you that would make a recommendation to City Council on the ordinance that is drafted. So staff has initiated this ordinance. A little bit of background of how we got here. On November 1st of last year, the City Council adopted a moratorium on new land use applications for new gasoline and automobile service stations. That moratorium goes through September 30th of 2023. So just a quick note, in our code, we have two terms for a business that sells motor fuels. It's either a gasoline service station or an automobile service station. It's different in different zone districts, but it is any service business that sells motor fuels. So they adopted that moratorium. That was in response to a citizen initiative that was submitted to the city clerk that would ban all new gasoline and automobile service stations. So that petition was submitted. It was certified by the city clerk. It's in the petition process where the petitioners could get signatures. If they get adequate signatures and submit them within deadline, then there would be a municipal election of the registered voters of the city on that ordinance. That was meant to be an attachment to your original packet. It accidentally got left out, so we emailed that separately to you all. I hope you all received that so you can see the language of their ordinance. But again, that moratorium was in response to that to put new land use applications on hold. I know you've recently saw the Murphy Express on McCaslin. The moratorium does not affect that because it only affects new PUD and SRU applications. It doesn't affect building permit applications. Earlier this year, the City Council adopted their 2023 work plan, and they did ask for city staff to initiate a city ordinance to regulate gasoline and automobile service stations. So we have drafted this per the City Council work plan. We hope this addresses some of the petitioners' concerns. Certainly, regardless of what happens with this ordinance, they can continue with their petition. But in any case, our City Council did want to try to address this as well. So I think the City Council and staff recognizes that new gasoline stations and gasoline equipment and automobiles do have certain health and environmental concerns. More gasoline stations certainly don't promote transition to electric vehicles, which we're seeing that happening in our market, and for good reason. There's a lot of concerns about their impact on the environment as well. So those are some of the reasons. So to go through what staff is proposing, we're proposing a limit of 6 facilities. So there are currently 5 developed gas stations in the city, and then there's the Murphy Express, which has their PUD approval. So we're recommending that there's a limit of 6, which exists now. We put some provisions in there to strengthen our zoning code, I'd say, where properties have previous approvals, we made it a little more stringent, so I'll go over those. We have a provision that says if a facility had a PUD and an SRU, such as the Murphy Express, and they don't get a building permit within 3 years, that PUD and that SRU would expire. I think you're probably familiar that we do have language in the PUD code. It doesn't actually say that the PUD expires after 3 years. It just says you can't get a building permit, but the PUD lives on. You can ask for a renewal of that PUD. It doesn't formally expire, so we have some stronger language about that. An SRU actually doesn't formally expire after a year. It says that it could be recalled after a year if an SRU is approved. Now, the Murphy didn't have an SRU. It was a use by right in that zone district. But all of our other zone districts, gas stations are an SRU outside of Planned Community Zone District. But if you do have an SRU for a gas station, and you don't initiate that building permit, it actually never expires unless it gets recalled by the Planning Commission or the city staff or the city council to actually recall it. So we've tacked on that formal expiration of any approval after 36 months if they don't pull a building permit. So the next provision is if existing gasoline or automobile service station ceases operation for 12 months, then they would lose their PUD and SRU approvals. So they would have to go back through the process again. Again, if it's in the Planned Community Zone District, it's use by right under our current code. But if it's in any of our other zone districts, their SRU would expire as well. The ordinance requires 1,000-foot spacing between facilities. So I think this helps address, certainly overcrowding of that type of facility. Broomfield passed an ordinance similar to this. They have 1,000-foot spacing now for any new gas station in the city of Broomfield, in order to try to limit the impact of gasoline stations on any one neighborhood or district. Staff has also provided an exception to that cap on the number and that spacing requirement if a new large retail center that's 80,000 square feet or more that has a new gasoline station as part of, that's integral to their development, then that could go up to 7. The cap could go up to 7 if that were to occur. We tried to carve this out. That would be a unique economic development opportunity for the city. And so that's in recognition of trying to balance the economic development opportunity of a large marketplace development that would probably only come with the gasoline station versus having the cap on the gasoline station. So those are the major provisions that the city staff has added into our proposed ordinance, and we're recommending approval for Resolution 6, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Commissioner questions. Commissioner Choi.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the presentation. I have a couple clarifying questions, if I can ask. In the information that we were provided, and then the secondary attachment that came through, I just wanted to make sure I understood clearly. In the proposed language, even though the resolution is termed gasoline, it does talk about gasoline, oil, or other fuel for motor vehicles. There's a little bit of ambiguity about motor vehicles. And does the proposed language and ordinance, would it prevent the development of, say, a hydrogen fueling station? Or, and I know it talks about liquefied petroleum gas, LPG, but it doesn't talk about CNG. Were those two considered, and what are the impacts of?
We didn't consider any alternative fuel types and allowing for those outside of gasoline. So this would actually ban any type of fuel station for an automobile, even if it was hydrogen or any other alternative.
And electricity
And
is
not ban, it would have a cap.
Electricity is not considered a fuel?
Yes, I don't think, as I would read the ordinance, a charging station is not considered a fuel. So if somebody was to open a commercial charging station, it wouldn't necessarily, and that's all they did, it wouldn't necessarily be capped by this ordinance.
I think oftentimes the term is liquid or gaseous fuels, but that would exclude the hydrogen at that point.
Right,
so,
and the CNG, yeah. And then the other question that I had, well, it's kind of a two-part question. One, what is the reasoning for the 1,000-foot separation? And it looks like there's a bit of an irreconciliation with the language that was on the second attachment that referenced 2.5 miles of separation.
Right. So that's the petitioner's proposal was 2.5 miles.
Okay.
And their ordinance is a complete ban. Ours isn't a ban, so it's just a cap. So if theoretically, if one gas station went out of business, another one could come in if they, it was allowed in the zone district or they received their SRU approval. Theirs is a ban, and the 2.5 miles, I think, was related to building permits as well. So they have provisions both for the zoning code and the building code.
Okay. So what was the reasoning behind the
So
1,000-foot
the reasoning
separation?
behind the 1,000 feet is that, if there is an existing gas station within a certain part of town, we feel that that's probably adequately served that part of town. And you wouldn't really need additional gas stations within that locality. And, a lot of times gas stations will, try to, they end up kind of clustering and locating within commercial centers. And we don't necessarily feel like that's necessary the purpose of our zoning code is to, of course, protect, life, safety, health, welfare, and have an appropriate use of land, mix of land uses. So we think if there is a gas station serving a particular area, we really don't need an additional gas station within that locality. And there are some health and safety concerns with gas stations as well.
Additional questions for staff? Commissioner Osterman?
Thanks for the presentation. My question is just about the cap, placing the cap at 6, and if there is any kind of analysis that was done by staff that helped to inform the cap of 6 being an appropriate cap, or different types of variables that would need to be considered given, looking into the future with the population growth, but then also the transition to electric vehicles. So the question is about understanding just the appropriateness of the number 6.
Sure, yeah. I think it was partially to accommodate what we have now. It was mostly for that. We couldn't come up with a way to kind of understand a per capita demand. And I think a lot of gas stations also serve more than just our city. Some of them are on regional roadways. And so there could be market demand. We are anticipating a phasing out of, at least, carbon-based fuel stations, gasoline stations. We're anticipating a phasing out, but we don't know how long it's going to take. So we just don't, from our point of view, we thought trying to balance demand, economic development opportunities, that we would keep it as a cap of 6, because that's what we have now. So no perfect formula that we could come up with.
Additional questions? Commissioner Krantz? Sorry.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I'm wondering if you could explain in a little bit more detail the exception for a retail center with a fueling station. Is there something I didn't see any applications for any new developments that would include that, but is there any particular reason to have that? Anything coming up in the near future?
Well, I think we're putting it in the, we can't really talk about pending applications, but we don't have a pending application for that type of use. I think that, the city has been interested in recruiting that type of business into the city in the past. We have had different big box vacancies within our commercial corridors in the past. And, there has been a desire to try to recruit those types of businesses. So if we had a complete ban on gasoline stations, that could prohibit or greatly inhibit getting a large retail center in.
On that issue in particular, you used the word integral. What's your definition
Right,
of
so
integral?
yeah, we had a lot. Yeah, so we don't have a definition of integral, and we were trying to think what the right word for integral, or what the right word was to capture that. And so we do say it's integral, and it has to be on the same lot or an adjoining lot, because oftentimes they're platted separate. Our King Soopers is exactly like that on South Boulder Road. The King Soopers fueling station is on an adjacent but completely separate parcel. And we did look up the common definitions of integral to try to think about how we would interpret that, which is, it really means it's necessary to the whole. And so if there is a marketplace coming in and it is necessary to the whole, then that's how we chose the word. We actually put quite a bit of thought into that. We're open to any word that might have the same meaning or intent that people were more comfortable with as well.
Additional questions or, yeah.
But it looks like Commissioner Krantz might have more too. But I'd like to continue, Rob, with this same exception discussion here, which is, so maybe in fact using the King Soopers example, that 80,000 feet, does that apply to like anything in that mall area or on a particular lot? Maybe that wasn't.
So it would be a single user retail center that's 80,000 square feet or more. So
Okay.
that would really be a big box type.
Okay.
I mean, it would be a large, so there, it would be a large grocery store. It would be something like like a Costco or a Target
Mhm.
marketplace or a
Okay.
King Soopers marketplace. Those are the type of businesses that would qualify that I know of in the
Okay.
market.
Yeah. So for example, the current King Soopers maybe wouldn't meet that qualification then.
Right.
maybe.
I actually looked that up. I could go see. They either meet it or they're very close. They might be in the 70s if they're not actually over 80,000 square feet.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks, Director Zuccaro.
Yes, Commissioner
Yeah,
Krantz.
just to follow up on this a little bit more, because it's hard to understand the exception without thinking in specifics for me. So I'm imagining now that when you're talking about a big box relocating or locating in Louisville, we're talking about the McCaslin corridor where we have empty big box stores, like where the Lowe's is or where the Safeway might be taken over by Kroger, or maybe something like in that area. And are those further than 1,000? The big box stores that are vacant right now, are they further than 1,000 feet from the proposed Murphy's Express and the existing 7-Eleven?
No. And that's why the ordinance is written to have an exception both to the cap and to the spacing requirement.
Okay, can I follow up just a little bit more? I'm also concerned about the definition of integral, because I just out of curiosity, Googled King Soopers. I guess I didn't know they're just in Colorado with only one in Wyoming. But King Soopers has 120 supermarkets and only in Colorado or 119 in Colorado and only 78 that have gas stations. So obviously King Soopers can thrive without a gas station. So would that disqualify it from being integral?
No, I think what we mean in the ordinance is if somebody comes with, and they're a single user, large retailer, and they would like to have a fueling station as part of their development, then I think we would say it's integral. I don't think they have to demonstrate it's necessary. I do think from an economic development standpoint, it may be necessary to come into a certain area. Could we get a new grocery store without a fueling station of any brand? Potentially, but we don't want to exclude one that sees a market opportunity and wants to have a fueling station as part of it. So it's balancing that.
If we drop the word integral from that statement? I guess it's on the slide. Well, is that the exact text on the slide?
No, I'll pull up the exact text.
Okay.
And we can play around with that. Yeah.
Questions for Director Zuccaro at this time? Yeah. Commissioner Howe. Oh, do you want to do that now? Okay. Okay, great.
I guess I'm looking at the requirements for an automobile service station under section 17.72.130. Could there be an automobile service station that does not qualify under this section? For example, if they don't sell fuels, but they still service cars, and then if they don't sell the fuel but service cars, then that the limitations would not apply to them?
Right. So the way this is drafted, it wouldn't apply to an automobile repair station or an oil change business, any of those, because anyone that's not selling motor fuels, because if you actually look at that definition, it has to be selling fuel to be called an automobile service station. Everything else falls under a different category.
That was my suspicion,
Yeah.
and thank you for supporting that. I guess just to follow up on Commissioner Choi's concern about the fuel, and maybe we need to define terms in this proposal, but fuel, from my definition that I see, is materials such as coal, gas, or oil that is burned to produce heat or power. I don't know if that's a definition we're working with, but I'm not sure if that would apply to hydrogen fuel cells, because that's battery and electrolyte. I don't know enough about it, but that may be something that we need to define in terms with this.
I'd probably have to research that a little more and see how that compares to our code language. Yeah.
I'd also be hesitant about approving hydrogen at this point. Most hydrogen is created by stripping it from petroleum products. So there's something called green hydrogen. That's a little different thing. So hydrogen may or may not be a good answer for us in the long run. But more questions. This is question time, not comment time. Commissioner Clancy, do you have any additional questions for Director Zucchero?
Yeah, and this might just be my not understanding the code too well, but why would you have a different, would it matter whether or not they've ceased operations for the approval for the SRU? I mean, why would do SRUs always expire after 12 months if you're not operating
Right. So
actively?
So there's two provisions in the SRU code, and I don't fully understand the logic. I almost think, but it says that if you get an SRU approved and you don't initiate that SRU within a year, then that SRU doesn't automatically expires, but the Planning Commission or the city staff or the city council can recall the SRU. They can bring it back up for hearing and see if they want to revoke it after a year. Now, if you start operating any type of SRU and it ceases operation for a year, then that SRU expires. So that's any SRU in the city. Now, not all gas stations are approved by SRU, so we wanted to lump everything together. So there are several of them in the Planned Community Zone District, including the King Soopers one, the 7-Eleven, the Murphy, those are all not subject to SRU. So we just wanted to say anything, just make it really clear that any gas station, regardless if it's PUD or SRU or however it was approved, that it would expire after a year if it ceases. And then it would be up to the city council and, with Planning Commission recommendation if they wanted to approve another one in the future, because that one would have to go away. So it's not a strict prohibition, but it's a cap, and somebody would have to come in and, meet all current city standards. I'm sensing I didn't answer your question completely.
I think you did. So if there was a gas station and they shut down for 12 months, that gas station could be replaced with another gas station, but they would have to come through planning, through city council with another SRU. But there would be no prohibition if we have a cap.
That's correct.
That would be given priority over a gas station that would be proposed for a new location. But the way that if there's total 6 and we're saying that you can put in a new application as long as one is out of business, would that one be first in line for a new application up to the cap, or would that be?
So whoever makes a complete zoning application first would be next in line in order to get the new station. There wouldn't be priority based on whether you're a use by right versus an SRU. I think there's more discretion with the city council on approving an SRU gas station versus a use by right gas station, if that makes sense. But there's no preference.
So I think I'm understanding it correctly, that there's no preference for an existing gas station location to become a new gas station should that go out of business. There's equal opportunity to put a gas station as long as it meets the 1,000-foot requirement
Yes.
somewhere else. Okay.
Sorry, Chair,
Commissioner
one
Choi.
last question. And just the way it's written, the ordinance would allow for one more or one exception. So we're talking about 6. If there's a big use case for it, maybe allow 1/7, but then that's it.
Yeah, and realizing that if, for example, a gas station goes out of business or the Murphy Express doesn't get built, then there's room for multiple large marketplace developments as long as they're with, so you could have a new large marketplace that gets you to the 6, and then there's still an option for one more the way it's written. So.
Oops, your Outlook is showing on, yeah, it was flashing an email.
Thanks.
I've got a number of questions, actually. Do you have any more right now? So, and bear with me because it's going to sound a little contrary at first, but one thought I had was if there was gasoline station operators that were proposing, okay, we're gonna voluntarily not build any more gas stations, and we want carbon credits for this, we would be insulted. We'd be like, well, that means you can sell at the current rate you have right now of gas stations, and you think that you're like, this is part of your carbon reduction program is to cap the number of gas stations of what they currently exist, or even allow, for a slight increase. So I'm curious, are there any studies that indicate that a cap will reduce consumption of gasoline?
Not that we've researched, no.
Okay, are there
So
any,
I don't know if that study exists or not.
right. Are there any studies that would indicate a reduction in ground level ozone production?
We haven't done any of that research.
Okay. So, and then regarding underground storage tanks, are you familiar at all with the history of underground storage tanks in Louisville and any ones that we've had to deal with, remediation or replacements of any time in the last recent history?
No, I have an interesting story about Thunderbird Barbershop that used to be a gasoline station, but I don't think it's what you're.
No, that's actually, that is,
Oh, is it?
that is
Okay.
important, yeah.
Okay.
And so, right, so underground storage tanks,
Yeah.
I think historically were steel, more often than not, and they rusted through and leaked and created large plumes of hydrocarbons that would migrate through areas of land for a very long time because they're not exposed to air at that point, and they just migrate at that point. Can you tell me more about Thunderbird? I'm curious.
Just that there was an abandoned cavern under Main Street that was part of an underground tank where that gas station used to be.
So I think when we talk about underground storage tanks, there is a big concern for old ones, especially ones that we've lost track of over the years, abandoned ones that have begun to leak. Another issue there often was with dry cleaners, where any number of chemicals would leak into the soil and then just migrate through the soil. So one of the thoughts, though, is as we begin, as gasoline begins to die, is there a potential that we're actually better off with the newer tanks than with the older tanks? So if we haven't seen any issues with the tanks we have right now, right, we're not aware of any current issues.
No.
So so there's a possibility that we might be better off with the newer tanks. Additional questions for you, though. So you're not aware of, the city of Louisville has never had to pay for the remediation of an abandoned underground storage tank that we're aware of?
Not that I'm aware of.
Yeah, okay, thanks. So I would say that, right, if that gas station operator proposed it, we would call them out on greenwashing. If they said we're gonna cap our number here, we'd be like, yeah, and you expect us to be happy for that? So I am curious, though, if we don't have any data that shows that this will not result in decreased gasoline consumption and in decreased production of ground level ozone, then I think we just have to be careful of why we're doing this. So I also find that that fewer gas stations probably does not slow the loss of biodiversity. Only reduced gasoline consumption can do that. So these are some of the issues that were raised in the packet as leading to why we would want to put this cap into place. So something to think about, particularly because I don't think that climate change is real and we need to focus on it. The California has a tool actually for small city or for towns in California. It's called the California Local Government Climate Policy Tool. I typed in a city that was similar size to Louisville, and it listed the most important issues where carbon needed to be dealt with, and that began with heating electrification. And so this is a relatively mild climate in California. This would be even more important here in Louisville. Commercial efficiency, which I see the governor's bill recently has some funding for. VMT, vehicle miles traveled reduction. That's a whole nother issue that's not addressed by this. Urban infill, which would call for increased densification of our town. The increase of the use of electric vehicles, energy efficiency, healthy diet, shift consumption, and increase in renewable electricity. So I don't want us to get lost thinking that we're really achieving a huge amount with this cap, and make sure that we keep focused on carbon reduction. So were there any of those issues that we're currently addressing? So heating, electrification, commercial efficiency?
Right, so the city recently adopted so last year we adopted the 2021 International Energy Conservation Code for both commercial and residential development, including a net zero code for residential. And then more recently, we upgraded our commercial code as well. So we added an additional energy efficiency standard for new commercial development. So some commercial buildings have to meet an energy use intensity index for certain types of commercial development, and then all of them have to have all electric space heating and domestic water production, so industrial processing, and there's a lot of exemptions to that, but there's space heating and just domestic water production heating has to be done all electric. The city is also initiating an internal decarbonization plan. We're transitioning a lot of our municipal facilities, and we're doing some studies on decarbonization for the city as well. So there's a lot going on at the city level. I think on the work plan as well, there's going to be consideration of all electric equipment, a ban on fuel gasoline equipment across the city. So that might be considered this year as well.
That's encouraging to hear. Great, thank you. Additional questions for Director Zuccaro at this time? Sorry, I kind of meandered there a bit, but.
I just can't help picking up on your meandering a little bit. I do wonder though, because you asked.
So we will get to deliberation. So my meandering was wrong.
Okay.
Well, so if we
Okay.
have questions for Director Zuccaro, then let's ask questions now. And
Okay.
during deliberations, we'll meander further.
That's totally fine. And but I do really appreciate the idea of wanting to quantify the actual greenhouse gas reduction from the initiatives that we put forward. So I really do appreciate your comment about that. But just to clarify, we do have an environmental compliance department or a contractor who works on our environmental compliance, and wouldn't they be responsible for inspecting gas stations, or is that totally at the level of CDBHE?
Yeah, the city doesn't regulate that. That's done through the state.
Thank you.
Additional questions? Seeing none, I would like to open it up to public comment. Please begin with your name and confirmation of your citizenship, and limit yourself to 3 minutes.
We have 2 folks in the audience in person and 1 online as of right now. Would you like to start with
Sure,
it.
why don't we begin with in person? As
Okay,
we do
so-
that, I would entertain a motion to enter some written comments. So this would be addendum 2 to our packet, the written comments into the public record.
So moved.
With a second?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Yes, first speaker, please.
First speaker would be Joshua Cooperman, followed by Catherine Smith.
Hi, Josh Cooperman. I live at 216 Griffith Street in town. I am one of the petitioners for the Citizens Initiative to prohibit new gasoline stations in Louisville. After City Council brought in the temporary moratorium on new land use applications for gasoline stations, largely in response to my initiative, the Planning Department approached me about achieving my aims through an ordinance. I really appreciated this overture, especially the offer to have the Planning Commission and City Council review the ordinance in advance of the deadline for submitting the signatures for the initiative. I also appreciated the Planning Department's consulting with me on the ordinance's details. So, of course, I fully support limiting the number of gasoline stations in Louisville. My primary motivation is to speed the phase out of fossil fuels as a means to mitigate climate change. Compared to the Citizens Initiative, the ordinance before you tonight places fewer limitations on the number of gasoline stations. As I have mulled over this ordinance the last few weeks, I have come to think that the ordinance's limitations are not sufficiently strong. Accordingly, I recommended 4 strengthenings in my letter from this morning. The first one is to eliminate the exception for a 7th gasoline station as part of a marketplace development. Just to briefly comment on that, I would much prefer that we don't allow any more gasoline stations. I also think that a large marketplace development is not in fitting with our small town character, and usually those kinds of developments are rather auto-oriented, and I think we should be pushing for pedestrian and bicyclist orientations. Second, I recommended that we reduce the cap to 5 in the event that the recently approved Murphy Express is not built. Third, I recommended that we reduce the cap by 1 each time an existing gasoline station closes. And fourth, I recommended that we prohibit gasoline stations in the Phillips 66 Rural Special District. Just a brief comment on that. This was a provision in the previously approved but now subsequently nullified plans for Red Tail Ridge. I think it was an excellent provision, and I'd like to see it in place. If City Council adopts a strengthened ordinance limiting the number of gasoline stations in Louisville, then I am likely not to continue with the Citizens Initiative. If City Council adopts too weak of an ordinance or declines to adopt an ordinance, then I will continue with the Citizens Initiative. So, I hope that the Planning Commission will recommend a strengthened ordinance to City Council. Thank you.
Thank you. And Ms. Smith?
Hi, I'm Catherine Smith, and I am a Louisville resident. I live in Ward 3. I wanted to just make the commissioners aware that the human health concerns from gasoline stations extend to air quality, not simply climate change. And among the toxins that are released when a gasoline-powered vehicle is just filled, when we just go to the gas station, or from the underground storage vents includes benzene, for which the World Health Organization says there is no safe level, toluene, ethylbenzene, and xylene. So we live in an area where our air quality is already at severe non-attainment. There are a lot of reasons for that, but every gas station that we add adds to air quality issues and concerns in our community. There are recommendations, and I see that this proposal doesn't address any considerations about special needs uses, for instance, schools or medical facilities where the people who are going to be using those facilities are likely to be more sensitive to these toxins. So I'm asking you to think about some ways in which, if you're going to allow any additional gas stations, to address these concerns and do something more nuanced than what you've currently proposed. In addition, I wanted to talk a little bit about the trends in gas stations in the United States. In 1994, there were 202 800 gas stations in the United States. The latest statistic I could find is from 2012, and that number has decreased almost roughly 50,000 to 156,065. So we're seeing a decrease. And the reasons why are that existing gas stations are adding pumps, which this proposal doesn't address, increased fuel efficiency for vehicles. And then the last one is kind of interesting to me, supermarkets and big box retailers offering cheaper gas, which is sort of something that we're thinking about facilitating. And when I look at who's got gas stations in Louisville, some of them are small family-owned businesses is what it appears to me. And they don't do well when we facilitate big boxes. So I'm just pointing out that the proposal that we have before us is something that's friendly to big business, but not to our local community our small business owners. That's kind of your policy call, but I'm just pointing it out. Rob, if you do want to do additional research from my internet searches, the California Air Resources Board has put out the recommendations about the distances between what they think the best practices are for health safety zones between homes and schools and other facilities like that. And that concludes my comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
I just would like to say that I wanted to thank all of you. I know that you donate your time to the betterment of our community. And I think that what you do is some of the most important work that is done in our city. And what our future is very much in your hands. So I thank you.
Thank you very much. That was very kind of you. And we have a Beth M. in the Zoom.
Beth, I just unmuted you. Can you confirm that we can hear you?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yep, thank you so much.
Okay, great. Beth McQuay, 972 St. Andrews Lane. So I lived in Louisville for 15 years, and I like to say that I used multiple gas stations in town, and I never had a wait of more than one car ahead of me. There's a gas station on South Boulder Road at King Soopers. There's one on McCaslin. And now there's apparently a new one on 95th that I never even had to use. And then there's a proposed additional one for McCaslin. Do not think there's a need for any additional gas stations. The ones that are already there are more than sufficient. So I propose either a ban on new gas stations or a limit on new gas stations. I know that Red Tail Ridge is likely to be developed. I think they could use the gas stations on 95th, or they could become a model and have electric charging stations, electric vehicle charging stations where people could plug their cars in when they go to work. So we don't need any more gas stations for the current Louisville. And I would love to see Louisville become a model of sustainability and environmental protection and not have additional polluting gas stations available. We've already proven that climate change, obviously the fire is an example of how climate change is upon us. we can't ignore it. It's happening now, and we need to take action now. We don't want to be adding further pollution and climate change issues. So please ban or limit any future gas stations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, seeing no more public comment, I would, sure, but why don't we get it on the microphone? Just here. You're welcome up again.
Thank you very much. The previous commenter's comments reminded me that I had also meant to say that I would like, among the nuances I would like to see is that if you do approve any additional gas stations, that the applicant should have to submit a needs-based assessment to show that there actually is a need for an additional gas station in the city before one is authorized. My understanding is that roughly to justify a gas station, you need 3,000 to 6,000 residents. And so unless our city grows considerably, I agree with the previous commenter. Thank you very much.
Sure, thanks. Do we have a staff response or closing statement?
No closing statements. I do have the ordinance up if you want to look at that language about integral.
Yeah, please, yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, we did have that there, yeah. Let's continue that. So my thought would be to strike the words "and integral" and just leave it as automobile service station as part of the retail center on the same or adjoining parcel. Because as long as that's the goal, right? I mean, if we're being honest about it, the goal of this language is to allow them to do that. Then why do we put a confusing word in there? Is my thought. I'm curious as to what other commissioners think. I appreciate that some people are against the exclude or the allowance outright, but
Chair, I would offer just a thought on that. You know, there's a fair amount of I think I'll say ambiguity because I don't think it's intentional, and I wouldn't want to say equivocality about it, but there are, you know, some missing specifics in some of the language that talk about, you know, whether it's part of the retail center. You know, one could argue that you could build a very large retail station that sells saltines and gasoline. You just have an 80,000 square foot store for saltines. Right. Not that they would do very well necessarily, but you know, I feel like there needs to be some correlation to kind of overall ratio of what the kind of proposed use would be, and I know that gets pretty far down the road of kind of means and methods of what people want to do with their establishments. But I just do wonder how we kind of, if there is going to be an exception, you know, that says if it's this size and, you know, it's this use, that there should at least be some bumpers on it to.
And does the word integral do that?
Well, it doesn't necessarily, no, but I think eliminating it further goes away from that, right? Because if we just say, if it's 80,000 or greater square feet and includes a gasoline or service station as a part of the retail center, you know, having integral in there at least says that it's, you know, I don't know.
Needed maybe.
Right.
You know, as I'm thinking about this, you know, there are a lot of commercial centers where there's a gas station on an outlot. So just even looking at our Safeway, it's within the parcel. I don't know that it's exactly adjacent, but it's really not part of it. And I wonder, I mean, if we could play around with the words a little bit, but I'm worried if it just says as a part of the retail center that it could be a different, Like a Murphy's Express could go in with the King Soopers, and they're not, so I wonder if like we could consider language that it's branded as part of the retail center. I don't know if that's the right word, but you don't, you want, if it's going to be a King Soopers marketplace, it should be a King Soopers fueling station, for example. They shouldn't be selling the parcel next door and having that confusion. So I think we're trying to find that language. And we did do this, considering the, I guess asking for a little grace on the language too, because considering the timeline of the petition, we did hurry this through very quickly, trying to be sensitive to that.
Sure. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, I guess I'm trying to parse out in my head if the integral is something that we're trying to do as a way of sort of protecting the integrity of the retail center versus is that what we're trying to get at? Is to make sure that we don't lose a slot of a gas station to something that isn't sort of what we're looking for from an economic development perspective?
Yeah, I think if somebody's looking to locate in the city and they have this model of a gas station and retail center together, and they come to the city and say, oh, you're not going to allow this. Okay, well, we're going to go to the neighboring city and build it where they allow it. So we're trying to avoid that because that's, for other policies of the city, that could be deemed desirable.
I guess I would almost replace an integral part of the retail center with an accessory part of the retail center.
And yes, that would be a very common zoning term that means that it has to be part of.
Right,
yeah.
it's part of the main, establishment, but it's not the primary use.
Yes. I actually like that a lot more than integral. Yeah.
Ching, nicely
Yeah.
done. The newest guy on the block. Commissioner Krantz, did you have thoughts?
Yeah, I personally just wanted to, I don't think that we should have an exception because I think what we're saying is that I would rather be more specific about this because what areas do we have that would be available for a big box retail center with a gas station that are further than 1,000? Oh, we're getting rid of the 1,000 feet there. So I think that there's a good reason for the 1,000 feet. I mean, from the previous part of this ordinance. And so I just don't think that we should have an exception for a large retail center, I guess.
Yeah, all right, that's part of our deliberations, yes?
Yeah, so
Absolutely. Any additional questions, final questions for, yeah?
Yeah, can we ask staff to
Yeah.
respond to some of the suggestions that were provided by?
Certainly can.
Okay.
It's your question at that point, yep.
Okay, so that would be my question, just if staff could provide some insights or responses to the 4 different suggestions that were made for strengthening the ordinance.
So the first one is the elimination of the exception for the 7th. And again, I think we've talked about there's certain economic development policies that would promote if we were to allow that. So that's the reason. I don't know if you had more questions specifically about that one.
No, I'm more interested in numbers 2 and 3. So,
2 and
for
3,
example,
yeah.
reducing the cap if Murphy Express isn't built, or reducing the cap by 1 each time an existing station closes.
Yeah, I mean, I think we certainly didn't start out to craft it that way. I think we'd have to really go back and redraft it. And we could look at doing that. I guess the only response is that we do anticipate that there will continue, that there's going to be a transition. And I think that, if there's demand, it does actually provide a service to residents as we're transitioning from gasoline to EVs or whatever the other technologies are that are going to replace gasoline. And so, you know, in consideration of that, we thought that allowing a certain number would continue to be appropriate. And we feel that as the market shifts, market forces are going to naturally limit the number and that we don't have to force it. So I think that's why we were thinking a cap would also work well, rather than a ban or a cap that reduces as gasoline stations go out. Because if there's, as Chair Brauneis had mentioned, it doesn't necessarily mean that there will be less gasoline use by eliminating the stations. It just might be a convenience issue at that point.
Any additional questions? Seeing none, I will now close the public hearing, and the planning commissioners will deliberate on the evidence presented. During deliberations, no further public comment or other testimony or evidence will be received, but I'd like to take a 5 or 10 minute break before we jump into that. Does anybody want 10? Why don't we take 10? Yeah. Yeah. Quarter after.
Recording stopped.
they're gonna be. Yeah. All right.
Recording in progress.
We can call the meeting back to order. Thank you all very much. Deliberations. I do have additional thoughts on this too, but let's start with somebody else. Who wants to share some thoughts?
I'll step out there first, Chair.
Great.
So I appreciate the effort put forth to kind of come up with an ordinance drafted by staff and by the city to address and put a cap. I think it's important to trend in that direction and kind of set the standard for the city. I think I had a little bit of a difficulty reconciling, I think somewhat similar to what you may have been getting at, Chair, in terms of kind of the language around the ordinance, and if that did or did not align with the intent necessarily. And you know, I know there are, and I apologize because I don't remember who said it, if it was maybe someone online or someone else, but I know that there are, you know, under the jurisdiction and oversight of the Colorado Division of Oil and Public Safety, I think it's safety, you know, there are regulations that kind of cap the overall density and what you can do at a gas station, number of pumps, you know, where they have to be, size of the lots, right? And I think those are kind of self-limiting factors. But I think one of the intents of the ordinance is to try to further and hasten the transition away from fossil fuels used for internal combustion engines in favor of the adoption of greener technologies and overall, you know, benefits to air quality, air emissions, you know, ground level ozone, contaminants, all the things. And so I think while I appreciate all the effort and I like where it's going, I think personally there are some parts of it for me where I think there are some additional enhancements that could be put in to the ordinance as it's drafted, such that if there is, and recognizing the benefit on the revenue to the city side of things of having that potential exemption for a seventh station, which does allow some flexibility for future growth and development. We don't want to turn away, you know, potential commercial development just for the sake of us not being able to have any way to allow that. I think if we're going to allow for an exception, there also should be, in my opinion, some further requirements on that, not to simply say, yes, we would allow an additional gasoline station, but, and you know, this could be written in based on the current average fuel standards for, you know, passenger vehicles or light duty vehicles and energy density of gasoline at the time. Essentially, you know, something that says, you have this many pumps, this is what you want to put in there, you have the ability to essentially dispense this much energy on a liquefied, you know, a liquid petroleum basis. You also have to have an appurtenance for electric vehicle charging to actually facilitate the adoption and transition towards, you know, the electrification. Not simply just saying, we'll give you one more gas station, but we'll give you a gas station if you also help, you know.
So that's an interesting point you raise, if I can chime in.
Please, yeah.
In this part of the discussion. So we have approximately 15 locations in the city of Louisville where electrical vehicles can be charged. Right, that includes city-owned facilities and Boulder Valley School District-owned facilities. We have 2 high-speed electric chargers those happen to be at our newest gas station, at 7-Eleven. So, because I'm not convinced that this is actually going to reduce global warming, that a cap on additional gas stations is going to have the benefits for health or environment. So then I'm concerned about what else might it do that's unintended consequences. So one of the challenges is, right, those slower stations, 14 locations out of those 15, those are great for people who work here, and they can come and they can charge their cars during the day. That's not the issue, right? So the issue is because typically people who own an electric vehicle will charge at home. That's the cheapest, most cost-effective way to keep your vehicle running. The challenge in transition to electric is the need for the high-speed charging stations, right? So somebody who's passing through town needs to charge. They don't have the 4 hours, 3 hours, however many hours somebody might charge if they were sitting at one of these other facilities. So the irony of potentially capping that is that the one facility that we do have in town is at our newest gas station. So it's just something to think about as we kick this around. I don't know where I'm headed with it, but I just think it's an important data point that may be the beginning of the transition is those chargers at the 7-Eleven station. So.
Yep, I agree. I think generally my point would be I would like to see some language that not is necessarily just preventative.
So right now they would be required under our parking requirements. So for instance, right at the Murphy's Express, it wasn't because we wanted them to transition to electric. It's because we had a municipal law in place that required that due to their parking requirements that they would also have electric vehicle chargers at those locations.
Right, and I think while that's good, it's that's the bare minimum, right? In terms of the code requires you also have to have this number of things, and to the point of 7-Eleven, right? I haven't been there personally, but I think there are, at least, well, there are 2 charging stations, but probably at least, a dozen pumps.
Right. Yeah.
So what I would see would be you put in a dozen pumps, you put in a dozen charging stations, or something that's again, the intent would be to facilitate the transition at a more accelerated pace away from simply more gas and diesel. We don't talk about diesel, but
is it more? Is it more gas and diesel, or is it the same much as spread? That's one of my concerns. Commissioner Krantz.
Yeah, first of all, I have to apologize because I could talk about this all night. I find this really fascinating. But overall, I'm really happy that the city is looking into an ordinance to cap or reduce the number of gas stations. And I think it would be great to adopt this ordinance with the 4 conditions that Mr. Cooperman has proposed. Those 4 points as conditions of approval for this ordinance. And then just for the fun of discussion, I think that what Commissioner Choi said makes perfect sense, that if we're looking to reduce the amount of greenhouse gases, City of Louisville could be the first city to limit the throughput of our gas stations rather than limiting the number of gas stations. That would be a really, really interesting thing to look into, because that would make much more difference, because as a member of the public pointed out, we're not talking about the number of pumps, and there's all, and there's so many different factors in what kind of gas stations we're getting in. So that would make, that's an amazing idea, and I would love to, but that would mean going back to the drawing board. So in light of that, I think I really would like to support this with these added points as conditions.
Any additional deliberations, thoughts? Commissioner Moline?
Yeah, I'm also at this place where I'm not necessarily opposed to this proposal before us. I also don't feel like it's we didn't see any evidence that we're going to change our carbon footprint by adopting this. And so I share the chair's perspective on, I'd like us to be looking out for sort of unintended consequences. Again, I'm not necessarily opposed to this. I guess my sense is that, like I was able to look at the council's December sustainability update to the city, and there are some things that our city really needs to hit on some key goals that we have that I think could make much more impact on the city's climate goals and the city's sustainability goals than this effort. But I'm not necessarily, like I said, I'm not necessarily opposed to it. In fact, I guess the other thing I would say is I'd really like to see this effort followed up by some really strong, I'd like to see the city really strongly follow up on some of the other things that have been set out as our climate and sustainability goals. And I guess maybe I do have one other suggestion is if there is this evidence out there that shows that by limiting the number of gas stations in your town, that you're going to have some positive environmental impact, because I think all of us up here recognize the climate emergency that the planet is in and want to be taking the strongest measures we possibly can. And so if there is that evidence out there, I really hope we can find it and share it with council as they kind of deliberate on this. So that's those are some of the things that I've been thinking about.
Thank you. Commissioner
Yeah.
Howe?
Yeah, those are really good points, Commissioner Moline. I agree. I think this ordinance moves the needle in the right direction. Is it the end result that we all want? I don't know if we're going to solve all of the problems with this ordinance, but as you said, I'm not opposed to it, and I think that that's a good statement. I would also like to incorporate some additional climate and sustainability goals to address some of these issues with future projects. As you probably know, I studied biology and chemistry for 4 years. My dad's a chemical engineer, and I know enough about energy to know that I don't know enough about energy. But in today's world, energy is a very hot topic. It's complicated. It's really complicated. I'd like to think that market demand would self-limit the number of gasoline stations without too much intervention as consumers move towards EVs and more renewable energies. But unfortunately, for many EVs are economically out of reach for a lot of the population. So there's what can we do as a city, and then what can we do as individuals? And I think we're trying to do something and move the needle in the right direction as a commission. For these citizens who can't afford EVs, I think we need to maintain gasoline stations. We can't just get rid of them now and into the future. I believe this proposal balances the desire to move towards renewable energies, yet providing services to those who may not be able to afford the change yet. This proposal also allows an exemption for future development, which attracts new businesses, employment, and growth. There's an argument that we could look at the definitions in regards to fuel, but in general, I think I'm not opposed to this proposal.
No thoughts? Commissioner Osterman.
Thanks. Yeah, I echo a lot of what the other commissioners already shared, and I'm in support of the ordinance. I think for me, two of the most compelling arguments are related to, first, human health concerns related to air quality when they're around stations. And then also, I think that another compelling argument is around economic benefits. And that's more of taking a long-term perspective, knowing that demand is going to be decreasing as more electronic vehicles come online. My concern would be if as a city we're allowing additional stations to be put in, what are we going to do 15, 20, 30 years down the line when those stations are no longer profitable, and then we're having to deal with repurposing them. And I think there are a lot of economic consequences that we would be facing down the line for having to repurpose those stations. And so, I guess I'm coming at it from the perspective of understanding that just placing a ban isn't necessarily going to reduce the consumption of fossil fuels, but I think there are other really compelling reasons for supporting the ban. And with regards to the language, I think I would be interested, open to the language being strengthened as suggested by, or as proposed by some of the citizens that we've heard from. So.
So I keep thinking about this, the health concerns. If we're pumping the same amount of gasoline, the chances are a newer station is going to have less emissions. So again here, we're weighing, do we intervene in the market, right? In the case of Murphy's, they had clearly identified that they feel they can make profit by building a gas station here. Are we better off with the newer station as gasoline stations begin to phase out? Then the older ones are going to be closed out sooner. On the whole concern for the city and closing out gas stations, well, when a gas station closes, they're required to remove those underground storage tanks and remediate the site if there's any on-site pollution at that point in time. So I don't find that we're exposed to anything at that point in time as a city. So I'm curious, as people kick it around more, to have thoughts on that. Commissioner Krantz, did you?
Yeah, I was reading that the average cost to remediate a gas station, I mean, it could be up, millions, but it's about $250,000. And that is the most common type of brownfield site, or it ends up being because of petroleum contamination. And so I just feel like, no, we're not, I understand the idea that if somebody, can't fill up, or they find too long of a line at the new 7-Eleven that we have, that they might end up driving more miles to go to Broomfield, creating more air pollution in the process of filling up their tank. But I just can't see how we can add new gas stations when all the major car manufacturers are going to stop producing gas-powered vehicles in 2035. And we have a new Senate bill in our state legislature right now to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 100% from 2005 levels by 2050. So any new gas station built is not going to, the average lifetime of an underground storage tank is 40 years. And so the most that we're talking about is 15 or 20 years before they're completely banned at the state level, because we're going to completely phase out fossil fuel use. So I don't see why we as a city shouldn't be ahead of the curve and cap or ban new gas stations. I don't think we should be building any new gas stations in our city for that reason. It's just not going to be the way that we do it in the future. And I think that by banning them, we're going to be part of forcing that transition. And plus, I mean, as everybody realizes, we're in a severe non-attainment area for ozone, and I just don't see why we should be waiting for the market to make that for us.
Sure, try.
So I have one other thought, and I appreciate, I may have a unique perspective on this. As my daily driver, I drive an electric vehicle. I also have a 45-year-old internal combustion engine driven vehicle. I have kids who have cars. My wife drives a hybrid car. We're kind of across the spectrum. And while I fully support and would love to electrify my 45-year-old vehicle, I don't have the means to do that right now. And I think there's a major concern, especially with something that many of us in the community may not necessarily have at the top of mind, where there are significant members of populations, either residents in Louisville or visitors or people who just come here for vacation, that may not have the ability to deal with we'll throw the term out there, gasoline desert, right? And I think that we can't simply make a determination, only looking at one side of the coin, right? No matter how flat the pancake is, there are always two sides to it. And while I would love to facilitate the transition away from fossil fuels, if everybody had carte blanche, that's just not the reality of our community, our state, our country. And so I think we just have to be sensitive about not, cornering people out of ways to go about their daily lives entirely too quickly.
Yeah, no, and another thing I wish we were talking about more was support for getting perhaps the city to help multifamily housing install charging stations. Because that's, when we talk about equity, that's a group of people in the city who simply don't have the access to it, even if they could afford an electric car. I think that's another issue, kind of a total side issue actually, but
Let's get way over here.
yeah, but something that as we think about plotting the course for the city to reduce carbon, that's something that needs to be taken into consideration. So, additional thoughts, questions, concerns of each other, from each other.
Just one thing I just to Commissioner Toy, I don't think, I appreciate that you're showing the other side of the coin, but I think that saying that we would end up with a gasoline desert is a little bit extreme. And I also would, if we do approve this, I would also just wanted to add that in the proposed ordinance, in the petition language, there were some really important whereas statements, and I think that some of those show the purpose more of a gasoline ban or to reduce the cap over the years than the whereas statements that we put preceding that the staff proposed preceding the ordinance, just specifically about the number of electric vehicles.
So I'm curious about those whereas statements, because some of them I find to be somewhat misleading, right? As I've stated, I'm not convinced this is going to reduce gasoline consumption.
Right.
Please share the ones that you're thinking of are particular importance, but.
Well, I think that when we're stating that the staff ordinance says that we have, I think it looks like about 2% electric vehicle adoption in Boulder County, as opposed to 1% in the whole state. And I don't think that supports, that statement is really supporting the need for reducing the number of gas stations. I think it's more important to include the statements that show the intent of the proposed ordinance that was included in the petition about the goals by 2050, our overall goals of reducing fossil fuels, in our general economy, the climate crisis, and the air quality crisis that we have. I thought those were more compelling, so I'd like to see those supporting the ordinance rather than the data from the Energy Office.
I guess can you point to the ones that are kind of sticking out in?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I copied them into my notes. And the one that says, whereas of October 1st, 2022, the Colorado Energy Office reports that there are 66,599 EVs registered in Colorado. That one, and then that one's followed by three more regarding the numbers of EVs. And I don't feel that I didn't feel that those really give a compelling argument for why we need to cap gas stations. I think that the overall climate crisis and the need for switching away from fossil fuels were more powerful arguments. And I was wondering if that would help us understand the need for this if we looked at the whereas statements that were proposed by the initiative ordinance.
I actually find that the city ones are stronger because I think those other ones are misleading. I don't think we're going to prevent any carbon dioxide from entering the atmosphere by this measure. And so while I'm leaning towards being okay with it for any number of other reasons, I just don't find that this is the compelling reason that what it's going to accomplish. So on that issues, I would, yeah.
Yeah, or like, I'd love to see the evidence that says that it will. You know, that would be that would be really wonderful to see.
Yeah, and that data, I mean, I scrubbed the internet before this meeting, and that data does not yet exist, but what we could quantify would be the amount of emissions that are coming, the stationary emissions and the fugitive emissions from fueling and the fugitive emissions from tank venting. I mean,
but that's the same thing. If X number of gallons of gasoline are being sold, whether it's being sold from 5 places or 6 places, those fugitive emissions are going to be the same. So, and perhaps less with a newer gas station, right? So I think one of the challenges people have had recently was so one of the things that Colorado hasn't done well is vapor recovery on gasoline filling, right? I don't know why we haven't gone there yet. I would love to see that. I think one of the challenges that maybe Costco did put in something like that recently. That's why people are having problems with them shutting off, is because they're slightly more finicky at times until you learn how to use them. But if a newer station is more likely to have vapor recovery, then we're potentially better off with a newer station than we are with the old stations that currently exist. So to the point of fugitive emissions, I don't find that this cap is going to reduce fugitive emissions either. So that's where I'm at with it.
I think we could probably find an analysis that shows that it would, by the number of storage tanks that we would have. But I would love us to be the first city in the whole country that limits the throughput of our gas stations, just based on some that popped into my head with what Commissioner Choi said. I mean, that would be a really clear way to quantify it. But in the meantime, I'm supportive of this ordinance without the exception, and as long as we reduce the cap.
But I'm curious, so does anybody else find, some of the whereas statements, what are other people's thoughts on that as to whether we need to include additional?
Yeah, like I guess I was thinking of when you look at the whereas on the proposed resolution, I'm just trying to react to the evidence that we've seen here at the hearing. I'm having a hard time with that third paragraph. Whereas the Planning Commission recognizes that limiting gasoline and automobile service stations will help address the health and environmental concerns of fossil fuel-powered vehicles and the strategy to reduce the I don't know that I don't know that I can say that. I don't think we've seen that evidence. Where was it?
It doesn't exist, right? I mean, there are no studies. And just kind of the basic, for me, it's just kind of a basic logic thing of, it's phenomenal that we're at 2% electric vehicles in Boulder County. Obviously, that needs to come a lot further. But limiting the gas station, people are still going to buy gas. We know that, right? I mean, so that's where I'm at a loss as to how this would actually achieve that third paragraph. So at this point, then, it calls into question the third paragraph.
Yeah, and I think that goes back to what I was trying to probably poorly articulate earlier, that placing the cap on whether it's the number of stations, the number of pumps, the throughput, those are admirable steps to try to reduce gasoline consumption and diesel consumption, but that's only effective if there's a viable alternative. We can't just take something away and think that people can get by without something else in its stead. And so that's why I feel like, you know, the ordinance as written is good and admirable, but it doesn't go far enough. Simply eliminating without providing a replacement isn't necessarily a viable long-term solution.
Right, yeah.
And again, you know, looking at this from all the angles of social benefit, you know, economic benefit to the city, environmental and sustainability benefit, I think it goes in the right direction. I think it provides for future appurtenances, you know, to make that transition. I just think that it needs some enhancements, you know, for additional requirements to facilitate that transition to BEVs. And
Maybe I could chime in here. I agree. I'm not sure. Well, I think the development of any development that you create has an effect on energy, right? Because you're creating things from the Earth's sources. So that's a bigger topic. But the creation of gasoline stations alone, I agree, will not increase emissions necessarily. But I think the goal of this is, the initiative of this is valid. And I think that third paragraph, when I read that, it seems like there's a goal. And it's setting clean energy and carbon reduction goals. And I don't think Commissioner Choi said we were limiting. I'm not sure we're limiting much. We're keeping, in fact, we're adding gasoline stations, allowing more gasoline stations. So we're increasing the supply of gasoline stations, even allowing for additional development, maybe even more population in Louisville. And that's why I think it's a healthy balance. But yet we're saying we do want to move into a different way. We want to move towards maybe more electric. And I think that is the trend, and that is the movement that we're seeing. So regardless of whether, not to discount the discussion, but regardless of whether gasoline stations actually cause changes to the environment, I think that this, as I said, moves the needle in the right direction, and the idea is valid, and that's why I would support this. Not because I think that the gasoline stations itself changes things, but the movement away from gasoline to electric is the current trend.
Director Zuccaro, you had waved at one point.
Yeah, I was just going to make a comment just about our EV charging ordinance that we did fairly recently. And, you know, on the planning side, we're really looking at EV charging much different than gasoline stations because, you know, certainly, you know, people don't have gasoline stations at home. They don't have gasoline stations at work. With transition to EV, usually you're not going to a destination. I mean, sometimes you are, but usually the intent of the EV charging is, you know, you go to work and maybe you need to charge at work, or, you know, most people are charging at home overnight. You know, it's really not completely, but largely for the employees of the business there is sometimes why you know, a big reason why you have EV charging anywhere, even at a gas station. Because I don't think a lot of people are going to go to the 7-Eleven just to charge their vehicle. Most people that have EVs are going to charge at home or charge at work. And then their travel sheds usually within the range of their vehicle, and it's actually fairly inconvenient. So as we're trying, on a planning side, as we're trying to transition into this new reality of EVs, it's really challenging to try to understand behavior. And so I think it's a good idea to think about how do we replace the infrastructure to support it instead of just getting rid of the old. But that's probably, you know, I think we could look at our EV charging ordinance and maybe make some improvements to that, or have some other ordinances that would further that, and still kind of have this ordinance. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about the philosophy behind our current EV charging ordinance.
I appreciate that. I do recognize that on the municipal level, the use case for EV charging, is structured in a certain way, right? I think to Chair's point earlier, right, we don't have a huge portion of our community that is in multifamily housing, but that's a huge barrier to EV charging to those people who would have an EV and live in multifamily. We also have a large number of houses where easy EV charging, even for single-family homes, is difficult at best, where, alley access is limited and your primary parking spot is on the street in front of your house, especially in the Old Town neighborhoods. I think additionally, and I know I keep harping on this exception and kind of strengthening the components of that related to adding in EV charging, if that exemption were to go into effect. I know personally, with my last EV, I would charge at home, but I frequently would also end up, going to Costco to go shopping, and I would park all the way across in front of the old sheriff's station, the satellite station, to charge while I was in Costco, looking like a fool walking across the parking lot with, carts and carts of stuff back to, all the way over there. So there is a use case for, having that type of thing in this particular scenario, because I wasn't the only one doing that, right? We kind of were a band of fools doing that together. So I think there's a precedent for it that could work. And again, I want to make sure that we consider the people that, but not for everything else in their lives. They would love to make a transition to EVs, but it might just not be economically feasible. And we have to account for providing, benefits across the board. And you're right, we're not reducing through this ordinance the number of gas stations, but not for the expiration of the moratorium. We don't have any limitation on them come September. So I do think it's needed. I'm generally in support-ish.
So it's interesting, back to the question of different chargers too, right? We are seeing more of the high-speed chargers come into play. Fortunately, that's one of the big things I think that would prevent a family who has one EV keeping their second EV so that they can travel cross-country. I mean, keeping a gas vehicle instead of having two EVs within the family for those who could pull that off. So I think it is important that we see more of those, not for the people who live here necessarily or work here. The parking lot ones that are slower, that works great at much reduced cost for installation. So I think as we move forward, we have to make sure we have that blend because they serve two different purposes. So Commissioner Krantz.
Yeah, I feel like I could continue to debate this all night, and I feel like we're talking more. We're really broadening the discussion. I mean, we have other ordinances and we have other policies that help us to make sure we have enough that will increase the number of EV charging stations and make sure that we're growing those. This is about limiting the number of gas stations, which I think that this is a case when we're in a small town that we shouldn't just rely on the market. We can reduce the number of vehicle miles that people travel. When the price of gas goes up, people will drive less. When the convenience of gas stations goes away a little bit, people will drive less. This is just kind of about us making sure that we don't do something that's like contrary to common sense. The market might say, hey, it's really economical for us to put in a new it's economical for a new King Soopers, just to use that example, to put in a new gas station. But it's not necessarily economical for the downtown station on Pine Street. That might put a small business out. So, if we're looking at market forces, the market might do something that's contrary to what Louisville wants. So I think that this is a really good way for us to take control and say common sense says we don't need more gas stations. The gas stations are going to become obsolete. We're going to be part of this change. We're a small town. We don't want to just let business, the dog eat dog of business work things out. We want to just make common sense. We don't need more gas stations, underground storage tanks built here, and it's going to fade away. So why don't we be proactive? So I feel like the bottom line is reducing the vehicle miles traveled, and this might help that in some ways, but it's just common sense that we shouldn't be increasing the number. So setting a cap makes sense. Reducing that cap over time makes even more sense. And I also just want to add, though, that just to push the discussion along, that I think that, I don't know, but just from my own perspective, I think that we'd see a lot of citizen support and residents supporting a ban on gas stations. And we could end up with that anyway if this initiative ends up on our November ballot. And I think we have an opportunity here to pass something that, might make people say, hey, we don't really need to vote on this in November. The city's taking a proactive stance here and putting in this ordinance.
I hear what you're saying, Commissioner Krantz. I appreciate it and agree with it. Probably I guess the thing I'm leery about is the climate emergency is going to require so much of humans. And I think we need to be really thoughtful about the efforts where we choose to put our time and effort. And I really want to see that time and effort put into places and solutions that really make a difference. And if this is indeed one of those places where it doesn't, again, there's nothing that's before us that's saying it is going to make a difference. But if it's something that can perhaps start to, increase people's awareness about it, I'm willing to be supportive of it. But I also don't want people to feel like, check, did it. Because this is not the thing that's going to be, that's not what this is, I guess. So I guess I just want people to be aware of that.
So at that point, I'm feeling more comfortable with the resolution striking that third paragraph, because that third whereas, to me, it really borders on greenwashing. Particularly the statement that limiting gasoline and automobile service stations, ... we will help to address health and environmental concerns with fossil fuel-powered vehicles, and as a strategy to reduce community-wide fossil fuel consumption. This is not going to achieve that. I don't find that it does that. So while I'm okay with putting a cap, I don't like gas stations. I don't particularly want more personally. We may see more in the future. That's entirely possible, because that's the market in action at that point, because they have done their market analysis and said we can make money here doing that. So I'd be okay with putting the cap in place as written, but I think we're fooling ourselves if we think we're accomplishing that. Any other thoughts? All right.
No pun intended. I think the well is dry.
Beautiful. I look forward to that day. All right. With that, then, actually, I will move to adopt resolution number 6, striking the third whereas paragraph in the resolution as drafted. And I would welcome a second on that if anybody is so inclined.
Can I make a counter motion?
Yes.
Does protocol allow the request, and I guess an amended adoption of the ordinance? Or do we have to ask to send it back?
So since I made the motion If you have amendments, I can choose to decide whether they're friendly amendments or non-friendly amendments. Is the way our procedure is currently written. So,
I'll second the motion, by the way, just to get that
Okay.
part out of the way.
thank you. Did you want to propose amendments at this point in time, though?
I would, and I appreciate you striking the third whereas in the draft resolution. I would maybe make a suggestion to replace the language in the ordinance to require, and here's where I fail in terms of the exact language, but require a commensurate addition of high-speed electric vehicle charging with the construction of additional fuel pumps.
Yeah. So that we would have to ask. We'd have to ask staff to draft that language at this point in time.
Right, it depends on how specific, like if you wanted to have the high-speed charging and specify the, it's level 3, right? Like
Yeah,
the
level
level
3.
3. So you could, for example, you could maybe propose that all new gasoline stations or expansions and pumps of existing gasoline stations, which would require a PUD or SRU anyway. So maybe just all new or expanded gasoline stations shall be required to have, I'm gonna say 4 level 3 charging stations or something, or 1 per pump.
I would say an equivalent, yeah.
Okay, so 1 per pump.
For level 3. So, okay.
I mean, I think that's an easy, I think you could make that condition and it's not difficult to draft as, just, we don't have to have the exact language, I guess. You could say, your condition is that staff drafts an amendment that achieves for level 3, or, a level 3 for each pump at a new facility.
Yes, that would be sufficient and my recommendation for an amendment.
So as a condition, I like this idea as a condition. The devil's in the detail, though. I think an equivalent number is, it's not going to happen.
Integral.
Well, yeah, because right as we discussed, that's an expensive way to serve people with electrons. And so most people are not going to be relying on those. It's only the through traveler who needs to stop, charge quickly, and continue on their way that's going to want to be using those from a cost-effective. Yeah. Please,
Yes and no. I mean,
Continue, yeah.
and again, using my own personal history as a use case, I've had scenarios where I use up all my electrons throughout the day. I come home. I know that I also have to go use a lot of electrons the next day, and I don't have a high-speed charger at home.
Right.
So I have gone to DC fast charging stations, top up to 80%, then go home and fill up the next 20% overnight. So,
Yeah.
Empirically, there is a scenario where that could be used even for residents.
Right, yeah, definitely. And actually, one of the things that also has been discussed at times is that lower cost vehicles will have smaller batteries and therefore shorter distances.
Right.
So there's a trade-off there, but you pay more for the fuel at that point. So I'm seeing like prices of 45 cents a kilowatt hour for DC fast charging, 25 cents for slow, something like that. So it's a big difference in cost or pricing at that point. So I wonder what other people think about. So I wonder, would you happen to know how many gasoline pumps are at the 7-Eleven?
I don't know, we could actually look it up in just a minute here. We can pull up the PUD and take a look, and of course, there's each pump housing, and they usually have 2 and sometimes 3 if they have a diesel, so I would want clarification if you mean
Right.
each actual pump or each pump housing, so.
I don't know. So curious what other commissioners think about this as a condition to the measure before us.
I like it.
I like, oh, sorry.
Yeah.
I liked Commissioner's, I think this is this can be a big topic. And we can continue the discussion. I like what Commissioner Moline said about there's some climate and sustainability goals that could probably even go further than that.
Well, that's all, yeah, home, yeah.
And I wonder if this is part and parcel of a bigger policy that,
Well, it certainly is, but that's not what, I mean, we have a resolution before us tonight, so we're gonna vote on it here shortly, I think. So I'm hearing a condition of something like, all new gas stations under this ordinance would be required to have X number of level 3 DC fast charging stations. And I don't know how we're gonna get to that number. The one that I'm most comfortable with is noting that the 7-Eleven has 2. And that from there, so that we add that, that's the cost of doing business in Louisville if you want to sell gasoline. And if there's a market for more, they're gonna jump on it, right? So,
I think to the point that a number of us up here have asked for, some verification of any data that support, some initiative or another. I think it's also incumbent upon us to probably apply the same judicious lens on whatever we would ask for in terms of this concession, not just to say equivalent or 4 or 3 or half or more, something like that. To your point, is 2 the right number? I don't know. And so I guess I would say that would be my intent, would be to ask staff to have some level of, response in terms of what the appropriate number could be. And
so you think we would continue this?
I think that's a responsible thing to do. Is maybe
Alright.
just, ask for one more little bit of research and a tweak to what the proposed language would be. And I think the intent of at least what I'm counter proposing is clear, such that maybe it would be an easy, relatively consent item next month.
I'm still leaning towards 2. Do we have data on the 7-Eleven at all, or?
There's 10 pumps at the 7-Eleven is what it appears on the PUD.
Okay. Are those, so that's accounting for both sides of the pump? Yeah.
Correct.
All right, so that they have a ratio of 10 pumps to 2 chargers. And somehow they decided that. At this point, I would like to see the condition just be that any new gasoline stations provide a minimum of 2 level 3 DC fast charging stations.
And I would just note, because you had said that they had decided that actually ended up being a city
Oh, it
council
was council.
condition.
Right. But did council require DC fast charging? They did,
Yes.
yeah, okay.
Would it be 2 or 20%? The number of pumps?
I'm comfortable with 20%. If that's where you're going, yeah.
Take what I can get.
All right.
well, then do you round up? It may be that may come down to numbers too.
20% or minimum of 2, whichever is greater. How does that sound, Amy?
I'm good
As a
with
condition?
And would that be in addition to our other EV charging standards that
Oh, for
don't
the
require
parking.
the level 3? So there would be the 2 fast charging, level
Right.
3 fast charging plus what's required under our base ordinance?
Wouldn't the level 3 satisfy that requirement?
It could overlap.
Question,
You could
yeah.
count it towards that if you wanted to, or it could be in addition to. It could go either way.
Asphalt is not a good thing, so I would say that we should allow that to be included
Yeah,
personally.
I think if it satisfies the requirement, that's fine, as long as it's 20% or 2, whichever is greater, because then if they require 3, then they've got 2 fast charging and 1 of dealer's choice.
Oh. Well, I'm thinking, interesting.
You're saying it would be in addition to whatever the requirement is?
No, in replacement of the parking requirement.
So one of the things we found with our base requirement is that it's a percentage of the number of parking spaces required. It's not,
Right.
it's by use, but it's based on how many parking spaces you're actually required to have, and then it's a percentage, but then it's actually installed, and then it's capable, and then it's ready. So there's 3 categories that we make each new business install. So it gets a little complicated on that. I think maybe I think we could come up with language that says that it's a minimum of 2, but whichever requires, but if the base code requires 3, then they can do 2 level 3s and then a level 2 to get to their 3 or something. But they have to have a minimum of 2 level 3s, and they have to also meet the base code, but this counts towards it, but they still have to do the capable and the ready.
Yeah.
Correct.
So we could stick with that, and we
I
could
like
draft that. We can come back with language, or you can just direct staff to draft that for city council consideration if it seems straightforward enough, potentially.
I'm comfortable with
Yeah,
that.
I think I'd be okay just directing staff to draft that language.
Commissioner Krantz, did you have thoughts?
Yeah, I just had a question that's kind of more of a procedural thing, because I feel like we're working really hard to make an exception for something that doesn't exist. So I just want to make sure that we are all on the same page. And I am just as in the dark as everybody else about what is potentially being proposed. I mean, has anybody been approached by somebody who's proposing a gas station in a retail center? Is there something, I just want to I feel like we're working really hard to make something work for something that doesn't exist yet. And I just want to know if it's something that was written into the McCaslin small area plan, that we're looking for a big box retail with a gas station?
No.
I just want to make sure about that.
I think one clarification, as the director put it, in terms of the qualifications for this requirement,
Yeah.
as amended language in the ordinance, it would be if the exemption was triggered or new gas pumps that were put in. So if one of them closes down and, we're sticking with the cap and we say, okay, that one closed down, now we're building a different one, or we allow a different one, that one also triggers this requirement.
Okay, that makes sense. I just want to make sure that, is there something that, just making sure that there's nothing specific that's come into the comprehensive planning process, or anything that we've been approached by any specific big box retail center.
No, he clarified that
Okay,
earlier.
sorry about that. I just wanted to make sure, because it feels like it's very specific.
All right, so we have a motion, and I like this condition on the table. Can I call for a vote, unless there's any last
Can you
minute?
clarify, maybe we just need to clarify the motion and the condition.
So the condition is that any new gas station, as part of their base EV requirements, will have to provide either 20% or a minimum of 2, whichever is higher, right, of a level 3 DC fast charging station as part of the development of those potential future gas stations. That may never happen.
Level 3 or above.
Level 3 or above, yes. Yeah, actually, thanks. Yeah.
And then we're still striking.
Striking the third whereas. Any other thoughts? Anybody wants to add? Okay, roll call.
Sorry, before you do that, I think whether you include it or a condition or not, I think we'll probably want to change the integral to accessory. So if you want to add that to your.
And the second condition to change the word integral to accessory use, accessory. Yes, thank you for clarifying that. Yes, all right, with that, a roll call vote, please.
Commissioner Krantz.
Yeah, I'm not in support of an exception for new gas stations, but that being said, I would like to see this pass, so I'm going to vote yes.
Commissioner Osterman.
Yes.
Commissioner Choi.
Yes.
Chair Brown Ice.
Yes.
Commissioner Moline.
Yes.
Commissioner Howe.
Yes.
Motion carries. Thank you all very much for even getting it to us this evening. Appreciate it. And we will move on from there. All right, we have time for Planning Commission comments, if anybody has something they wanted to add.
Shout out to past planning commissioner Diedrich for accepting his city council position.
Yes, absolutely. That was, yes, congratulations to him and good for the city, I think. Any other planning commission comments?
It was really nice to receive a letter from our soon-to-be replacement for Commissioner Huffner,
Yes.
introducing herself, and look forward to working with her too.
Forward to her being here next month. Any additional planning commission comments, staff comments?
I know you all received an email about an additional meeting in March to discuss accessory dwelling units. This is a city council work plan item. I just wanted to give a little bit more context on that as you're looking at your calendar, seeing if we can have that meeting. The city council wanted to consider allowing ADUs specifically for Marshall Fire rebuilds, you know, as a way to help support those rebuilds. You know, there's certain financial, you know, hardships for a lot of people who are trying to rebuild, and I think it's in recognition of that. So we wanted to have a discussion about potentially looking at that. I would say more broadly with accessory dwelling units, we're doing a housing study this year as well. We're going to look more broadly at ADUs along with many, many more hopefully strategic initiatives for affordable housing later in the year. But we did want to try to move this forward quickly because people are designing and building their homes now. So if it makes sense for this, you know, we don't know how it'll shake out, but if it makes sense, we do want to try to advance it fairly quickly. So I think it was March 20, yeah.
3rd, I think.
3rd, yeah.
And to keep expanding on what Commissioner, wow, it's late. Everybody's a commissioner in this room, apparently. Director Zucchero was saying, Planner Brackett Hogstad sent an email explaining also that part of this process includes, starting in mid-February, staff is doing engagement with the public and research on the subject, and they're holding a hybrid open house on February 16th. And the invitations have been sent specifically to Marshall Fire survivors. So the overflow PC meeting for March would allow for a fast-paced adoption process. So there's a possibility that staff, depending on feedback from the community at the open house about the desire for speed or not, staff could be bringing a draft ordinance to the Planning Commission to consider that night. It would not just be sort of a study session discussion on the topic. You could be contemplating actual draft ordinance. And she goes on to say the faster pace could allow more families to adjust their building plans to accommodate ADUs if approved. However, a slower paced review option is also on the table. Overall community input will help inform the timeline of the project, whether a new ordinance is adopted, and which regulations are included.
That's exciting.
Yeah.
Would this be in lieu of the March 9th meeting, or is this an addition?
It would be in addition to.
Addition.
So the question, we wanted to take the temperature of the room, see would there possibly be a quorum that evening based on your availability?
Was there an option to potentially do this as a hybrid meeting on the 23rd?
Always. I mean,
Okay.
yeah.
I can be available as,
Okay.
You know, with a hybrid option.
And I've stated I'm not certain I can commit to it, but
Okay.
It's an important thing. I wanted to move ahead, so
Okay.
I think if we can get quorum, then we should.
Okay. Yes, it's fantastic.
On that note too, if anybody's going to be absent, please notify the whole commission at your earliest convenience. So, for any meetings, and including Elizabeth, I think you're the only official CC, right? That we should include on those notifications, or right? You've
Yeah,
got
that
enough
would,
email
yes, I'm,
in your
yes,
inbox?
please,
Yeah,
thank
okay.
you.
Great, thanks.
Do you want the emails would you like us to copy all? I was just wondering because, I mean, I don't want to flood everybody's inbox, but I appreciate knowing who's coming
Yeah.
too.
That's what I'm requesting, is that we tell
Okay.
everybody.
Okay.
Yeah, no, if you're not coming. So the default is we're gonna be here, right? And so it's only when you're not going to be coming that we should notify everybody through individual email address and include Elizabeth on that. All right. Thank you. Any additional staff comments? Next meeting, we're looking at something.
March 9th?
Yeah.
Do we have any agenda items listed as potential?
Right now, Planner Ritchie, pardon me, is tentatively bringing the Centennial Heights West and Enclave PUD fence amendments.
For March 9th. Okay,
Yep.
great.
Yep.
Thanks. All right. With that, then I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So
So
moved.
moved.
All in favor? Aye.